Hope. It's essential to life, yet thousands have lost hope. Georg Grellmann can relate to them. He lived the story of my new Pacific Press book, My Enemy, My Brother. George grew up in Germany and turned 18 shortly after World War II exploded. My Enemy, My Brother takes the reader behind politics to the heart of a young man. After boot camp, George's division headed toward the Russian front. Early in the morning, their train crossed into Poland, which had already fallen to invading armies. After breakfast, George threw his banana peel out the window. A skinny boy snatched the peeling off the ground and stuffed it in his mouth. George stared in disbelief. As the boy chewed, a small piece stuck out. A bigger boy grabbed the corner of yellow and hungrily shoved it into his own mouth. George's jaw dropped. How hungry they must be. All across Poland, children with hollow eyes begged for food as the train passed. Before long, George was in the trenches. After one of the first battles in which he fought, Russian corpses lay scattered. Sadness at the loss of life tore at him, yet he felt relief that the victims weren't his comrades. Days later, one was. That night, burying his friend in a shallow grave was hard. Burying the questions in his mind was impossible. War dragged on. Time and again, George survived when there was no earthly reason. One night, as a messenger, George crossed a bridge safely, only to discover it had already been mined. Another day, a grenade hurtled toward him. It landed 15 feet in front of him, skidded across the ground, and stopped at the soles of his boots without exploding. In one battle, his company retook their position as ordered, but only 5 of 90 soldiers survived. On home leave, George was in church in his uniform, enjoying the stained glass windows, the organ music, the familiar smiles. He saw Rudy's wife come through the door, carrying their baby. George's eyes locked with hers. Her face blanched. She burst into tears. Rudy must have been killed, George thought. Indeed, he had. So had Herbert and Fred, all friends George had grown up with. How do you deal with the guilt of surviving when so many of your buddies don't? World War II stole George's youth, his trust, his idealism, his university scholarship, his fiancée, even his freedom. George came to know despondency, depression, even utter despair. But George did not remain a victim. Why? Because God broke through his despair with grace. Grace that empowered George to make grueling choices and to reap rich rewards. George had plenty of excuse to harbor hatred. Instead, God's grace accepted flowed out in loving and joyful service. The true story, My Enemy, My Brother, offers its readers hope. It will help them sense, along with George, that God's grace is big enough to forgive the worst of their past and faithful enough to transform their future.